Hello and welcome. My name is Elisa Voshell. I'm Executive Director at Minnesota Center for Book Arts. MCBA is a community-based nonprofit organization dedicated to igniting creativity and community through the book arts. Through our artistic and educational programs, we preserve the tools and traditions of the book arts, support artists using these media in compelling ways, and connect contemporary audiences to the arts of the book. We believe in the limitless creative potential of this dynamic and evolving art form and envision a world in which creative expression through the book arts is accessible to all. As a nonprofit organization, community support powers our work. I'd like to acknowledge our MCBA Prize sponsors and supporters, without whom this celebration of artists' books would not be possible. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Wet Paint, Sunrise Banks, CBAA, Learner Publishing Group, and Daily Printing. And thank you to our board members for their additional sponsorship support for this initiative. Heidi Bing, Denny Henningsen, Corey Zanin, Casey Foley and John Noisy, Diane Merrifield, and Virginia Meyer. This activity is also made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board operating support grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, as well as individual supporters of MCBA. If you enjoyed the event tonight and want to help make more of our programming possible, please consider becoming a member or making a donation to support our center. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for being here this evening or whatever time of day it is for you, especially the artists, some of whom it is quite late, or if you are attending and it's quite late or quite early, we appreciate you being here as we explore innovative and thought-provoking artist books from around the world and celebrate this year's 5 finalists and reveal the 2024 MCBA Prize winner. This is our 8th iteration of this biennial international award, which we launched in 2009. Recognizing excellence in new work from across the dynamic spectrum of book arts. The finalists each receive a $500 award, and the winner receives a $2,000 award in recognition of their contributions to advancing the book arts field. We'll also be using, later in the program, we'll be showing a video of the 5 finalists talking about their work. We'll also be using the chat feature for you to ask questions during the Q&A. And if you're local to the Twin Cities, we also invite you to come see the MCBA Prize exhibition in person. It's currently up in our gallery, in our main gallery space in the Open Book Building in downtown Minneapolis. The exhibition features 20 semifinalists and 5 finalists, and it's on view through October 12th. We'll be hosting an in-person reception on Friday, September 27th from 6 to 8 p.m. And if you are local, I hope to see you there. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce this year's MCBA Prize Juror Yuka Petz. Yuka is a Washington-based artist and curator whose practice centers language, paper, and text. Her work encompasses printmaking, drawing, narratives, and one-of-a-kind and limited edition works. Her work has been exhibited internationally and across the US, and her artist books are in numerous special collections. Yuka hosts the Artist Books Unshelved video series for the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art and teaches youth and adult book arts workshops around the country, including recently at MCBA. I was overjoyed to be able to participate with her when she was in town. While living in New Orleans, she was an artist member of Antenna Gallery and a principal organizer of the artist book collection at Paper Machine. She's also previously co-founded SIFT, an interdisciplinary arts organization in New Orleans, and served on the board of directors at the Seattle Center for Book Arts. Yuka holds an MFA in book arts and printmaking from the University of Arts in Philadelphia, my hometown, and a BFA in graphic design from the Rhode Island School of Design. She's currently based in Tacoma, Washington. Yuka's site-specific installation, The Reality You Were Always Part Of Wasn't the Reality You Knew, is currently on view in our Outlook Gallery through October 5th. Please join me in welcoming Yuka.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you so much to MCBA for inviting me to be the juror for this year's MCBA Prize. It was a great honor, and to have this opportunity to examine and look really closely at everyone's work was really a great pleasure, and also, of course, a great challenge. Um, with over 150 applications, it was a lot of work to really spend time with. And like I said, it was really a great honor because the quality of the work was just above and beyond across the board. And there were some familiar books that I was really happy to revisit. And then there were many new to me books that I got to fall in love with. So thank you for to all the applicants who put your work forward to be considered for the MCBA Prize. It's never an easy task to be a juror for anything. And so I really kept the description of the MCBA Prize really close in front of me as a guiding direction. And, the prize honors excellence and new work from across the dynamic spectrum of book art. I feel like while I was jurying, I could recite that just over to anybody without having to read it. It was really deep and close to me. And then among the factors that I was asked to consider while looking at the work was also that, among a few different factors, was that the work expands the fields in all aspects and brings diversity to book arts. So I held those things very, very close with each submission that I looked at. And among the submissions, there were some really interesting themes that I noticed that kind of came through, not every book, but a lot, enough of a critical mass to notice. There was definitely an urgency. I think many artists, many of us generally feel an urgency of this moment, especially sociopolitical and environmental. Translation was a really interesting theme that came across a lot of the work. And interestingly, I noticed that much of the work were documents of labor or documents of an artifact of a performance. They were there, both among the semifinalists and the finalists across the board. And I thought it was really interesting that many of the books really intentionally examined elements of bookness to tell their stories and to share their concepts. So there were very deep and close attention to the book and bookness, book object, all of the things that encompass what a book is and can be. Um, Before I move on to the finalists, I wanted to take a moment to share a conversation that I had recently with another artist whose work I really admire, and who is an excellent book artist for many years. And they said to me, "Oh, I don't apply for that or I didn't apply because I never think I'm going to get the prize. Like I'm never going to get it." And I thought, oh, that's so disappointing because I think that this artist's work is wonderful. And it made me sad that they talked themselves out of it before even putting the application in, just because they were sure they weren't going to win the top, $2,000 prize. And yeah, the competition is high. It's true. There is one grand prize every 2 years, but there are between 20 and 30 semifinalists every year. And those works get included in the exhibition. And there's also all of the works that are submitted are put on the MCBA Prize website in this really generous archive that if you're not familiar with, I highly encourage you to look at. I'm not sure, I think it maybe goes back, I'm not sure exactly how many years it goes back, but all of the applications, all of the submissions on there. And I guarantee you that people are looking at those. Even before I was involved with MCBA in this, I was looking at those. I use it for research. Artists, it's a great resource for artists, for curators, for librarians. So don't talk yourself out of it just because you don't think you're going to get that prize. It's okay to put yourself out there, and it's okay to apply for it. Don't let this one little bit of it be a reason to stop you. So that's just me as an artist talking to the artists out there. I wanted to share that with you. But we are here to honor and celebrate the finalists for this year's prize. And I'm so excited for this evening to share these with you. The finalists stood out for me really because of their innovative and unified excellence across craft, concept, and the execution of their book works. One of the things I really noticed about their works was that these works it felt absolutely imperative that they were of this form and made of these materials. And the ways that we read these books just absolutely support and uplift the research and the carefully crafted ideas and stories that these books share. So without further ado, I am excited for us to take a look at the work from the 5 finalists for our 2024 MCBA Prize.
History of a People traces the roots and development of African American culture in the United States using scent as a charge material. The crown-shaped book consists of 6 bottles or chapters of custom formulated scents that correspond to the cultural landscape of selected periods of time in African American history: roots, journey, arrival, harrow, protest, and visioning. Materials were selected for their historical significance. The form is based on African architecture and tribal crowns with a thought of their continued evolution over time and distance. The circular wooden base has been painted with indigo, and a red band inserted between the top and body of the base denotes a continuum and ancestral connection. Inside the base are incantations that are not accessible to the viewer. The scents are interpretations of events and materials prevalent during specific time frames, including ambergris for roots, salt and water for journey, and smoke and sugar for harrow. Other aromatics are more abstract, such as containment in journey and air and visioning. The aromatics exist as a re-memory, faded but lingering throughout time. On the base are chapter headings with corresponding adacris symbols, a system of icons that communicate proverbs or history. The verb symbol or sankofa on the cover means go and get it, encouraging the viewer to look to the past for guidance. The individual scents, materials, and symbols in history of a people form a singular accord, representing a span of history and the complex layering involved in the creation of a new culture.
It has been said that what is done in the dark will one day be brought to light, but what happens when light never comes? In the Dark explores the complexities of grief and reconciliation when justice remains out of view. Using redactions from the Mueller report as a placeholder for the ongoing miscarriage of justice in American politics, these pages hold space to ponder what information has been lost or may never be known. They are a place to turn inward, sit with grief, feel the weight of one's own anger, and in time, contemplate a way forward. Bound as a medieval girdle book, this work muddles an already murky separation of church and state. While historically, these portable volumes often contain religious scripture, In the Dark uses governmental reporting to critique how politics have become religion for an expanding demographic. In this book, darkness and light contradict their known meanings. Excise redactions illuminate what has been concealed, leaving behind the literal shreds of evidence. Worn at the waist to always be close at hand, this girdle book structure serves as an ever-present reminder to the burden of obstruction of justice on the body politic. More than one-third of the 448-page Mueller report includes redactions. In the Dark contains each of these pages, hand-cut in documented order, with nearly 1,000 redactions in total. The text pages are waxed, black-pigmented, overbeaten abaca, handmade by the artist. The book is bound over double-raised cords, laced into quarter-sawn white oak boards with sewn end bands, and is covered in black suede with brass embellishments. It is housed in an archival document box in the same manner as a medieval manuscript might be stored in a library vault. This book is, by its own account, an artifact of modern American history.
Flora of Mughal India is about beauty versus money, love versus power, legacy versus economy. It's about how we see the world around us. It's about nature, how we choose to represent it, and how that representation shapes our perception. This book is an exploration of that shift in perception in illustrated manuscripts in Mughal India between the years 1500 to 1700, and how that consequently changed the art of the book in India. A collaboration between myself and master craftspeople in India, this book combines letterpress printing, calligraphy, miniature painting, paper cutting, and hand-illustrated elements. Floral portraiture in the Mughal miniature tradition was impacted by colonial interests in the commercialization of plants. The existing aesthetic and book culture that glorified nature and beauty and the sheer love of plants was ultimately demolished by the European scientific botanical aesthetic, created for the colonization of plants. The papers used in the book are traditionally made raw hemp papers made by Hussain Papers in Rajasthan. Mughal manuscripts sometimes had more than 4 artists working on a single image, and to honor that collaborative model of the past, the base for the illustrations in the book have been printed using wood engraved blocks, which have then been painted over in intricate detail by miniature painter Jaiprakash Lakhewalji, his brother and his father, based in New Delhi. The end pages are designed based on stone lattice work found in architecture of the Mughal period. These are embellished using gold leaf and hand cut by Ram Soni ji, a Sanji master craftsman based in Ajmer. The layouts, image, and text placement and the paper in the book all reflect and take inspiration from the Islamic manuscript tradition. These are accompanied by couplets written by poet Ashok Lal in Urdu, calligraphed by Zinat Kovalur, along with transliterations in Hindi and translations in English. The illustrated section of the book opens left to right as in an Islamic manuscript. This section is juxtaposed with the text, that section of the book opening right to left, a conversation between the two aesthetics. Flora of Mughal India looks critically at book history and examines whose stories we tell and how we tell them.
This Land is My Land is about current-day white supremacists, white nationalists, their sympathizers, and everyday political rhetoric that engenders their ideologies. It is an attempt to see and know the many activities and contradictions of hatred, bias, and cynicism rooted in sloganized language. It's also an attempt to unveil the relationships between white supremacy, American exceptionalism, and capitalism of shopping malls, concrete parking lots, graveyards, land trusts, and development, all which together lead towards alienation from the land. Underneath all of that, it's a consideration of subterranean reading comprehension and the crux of urgent types of legibilities in the oversaturated digital age. This book makes use of different paper types, physically torn pages, and 2 multi-level foldouts. It flaunts its ordinariness through its naked bookboards with packing tape, exposed spine, printer copy paper mixed with a cheap glossy photo paper, and facsimile rips caked on broken sidewalks. The cheapness exudes the built-in obsolescence of our material culture, and it also hints at these shallow, bigoted ideologies as being bought and sold products. While the mixed haptics bolster the subtextual effects of the signs and words on each page, the foldouts demonstrate an interpenetration of reader and book object. Complicity with violent, colonizing realities reveals itself in the action of reading. It is in the turning of each page, the accumulation of time passage, moving through the land, and finally, in the opening of the 2 foldout sections. The ways in which we read, what we extract from those people, objects, cultures, land that we interact with, is a reflection of our culture and ourselves.
As with all my projects, the starting point for 2 to the 11th power was a literary text, a short Japanese story that I found so fascinating more than 10 years ago that I wanted to have it translated into German so I could use it for an artist's book. Unfortunately, when I asked for permission to print a small edition and make a German translation of the original text, I encountered a series of problems, and finally, for the first and only time in my experience, I had to shelve a project that I had already started. In the summer of 22, I was organizing my archives and stumbled across the extensive preliminary work for the project, which I still found fascinating. It reawakened my ambition to find a way around the printing permission that was never granted. I made various attempts to use the text in a way that would produce a readable result without violating the copyright, and finally I decided to have it professionally encrypted. Jörn Müller-Quade, professor of cryptology at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, did this for me. The original Japanese text and its English translation went through a complicated process that, in cryptologist speak, can be simplified as follows. First, 2 passwords created by 2 different people are imported and suitably combined at random. This creates a binary key. Second, the text is imported and is now a binary object in the computer memory. Third, the text is compressed. Since compression is inefficient for small input volumes, a comparison is made to see which is shorter, the compressed or the uncompressed text. The shorter version is then further processed. Fourth, a separate password is derived for this plain text and then encrypted. The ciphertext is binary. Fifth, the ciphertext is divided into 11-bit blocks. In a Japanese English list of 2048, which means 2 to the 11th power entries, each number from 0 to 2047 is assigned a word. For each block, the 11-bit value is then interpreted as the number n, and the nth word in the dictionary is displayed. The list can be used to transcribe computer-generated coincidences as readable text. The result is a long sequence of individual terms printed in monospace font. That makes them particularly appealing, as they bring up a series of associations and suggestions for the reader or viewer. The same is true for the illustrations. 10 collages of objects of varying size, all of which are described in the original text. The various objects were photographed and scaled to the same format regardless of their proportions before dismantling and collaging them. As with the encrypted text, individual elements can be identified. Sometimes they also produce unusual and provocative combinations, even though the original story is no longer visible. The third section has to do with colors that are mentioned in the original text. 20 hues are printed as individual stripes across 4 pages. Here too, they are the shades I imagined while reading the text. As with the objects, they represent my subjective response. All 3 components are printed on different Japanese papers, each in keeping with the different characters of the prints. The book is bound in a cover with encrypted embossed text for the author and titled. It is protected by a sleeve showing parts of an interior view from a 2-point perspective related to the story. Like the illustrations and colors, it is a very subjective association. The encryption and deconstruction process is echoed by the puzzle slipcase, a 3-part object held together by magnets that is intended to seem confusing when disassembled. The book is intended to work as an independent project, separate from the original, and to inspire people to think about perception, terminology, and interpretation. The original text is merely a starting point from which something new has been created, and no longer plays any role in the book 2 to the 11th power.
I'd like to acknowledge all of the semi-finalists and finalists for their captivating and diverse work, and particularly the finalists for sharing the inspirations behind their books in their own voices. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank MCBA staff member Leslie Wondergood for their wonderful videography and editing work on this video so that we could share each of these inspiring books with you all tonight. And without further ado, it is my great honor to be able to announce that the winner of the 2024 MCBA Prize is Radha Pandey for Flora of Mughal, India. Radha, congratulations. Please join me on screen.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm honored to receive this prize, and I'm really honored to be among this fantastic lineup of artists. Seeing everybody's work in this video was just mind-blowing. So thank you.
Thank you. And Yuka, if you can join us as well.
Hello, hello. Congratulations, Radha. It
Thank
really
you.
is stunning work.
Thank you very much.
So I have a few questions prepared for Radha, but I also wanted to encourage everybody who's joining us to, if you have questions that you'd like to add into the conversation, you can add them into the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on them, and hopefully we can have your questions answered as well. So first of all, Radha, I spent a lot of time looking at this book closely in preparation for this evening, as well as your other work. And it was really interesting to dig deep, and I noticed that this isn't your first book that addresses or works in conversation with the art and architectural aesthetics of the Mughal period in India. And for those of us who are maybe not as familiar with this era, could you tell us a little bit more about your personal interest with this period and what draws you to it?
Sure. Yes, it's not my only work that relates to the Mughal period, which is the period between early 1500 and mid 1800s in India. And what draws me to it, and what I draw inspiration from most, is the aesthetic and how it has been adapted to every aspect of life in that period. and it's still visible in India today because of all the remnants of that era. And so, be it books, beautiful manuscripts, or architecture, or stone lattice work, or the planning of gardens, everywhere can one see how the influence of these rulers on India affected design and aesthetic and beauty and planning in a way too. What I really appreciate most when I did my research for this book was how, when these rulers did sort of invade India, what they ended up doing was, instead of eliminating the existing culture and existing aesthetic, they actually adapted their own aesthetics to form a whole new language, which is what makes this so unique, this era, this time period, and everything that resulted from it.
I think that's all of that seems very contained in the book. Like, I know that a lot of the sort of the details throughout the book, like the gold sort of place, I don't know exactly what you would call them, but where you kind of the place markers to help us sort of orient ourselves in the book. And then some of the background patterns, those were taken from some of the stonework and lattice work. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the background patterning is actually from the tomb of one of the emperors. That pattern is used in some of the work in his tomb, and he was the one that really loved literature and set up the first libraries. And so it's kind of an ode to him and his legacy, as well as those gold foil stamps that are place markers. So those floral motifs I designed based on the 9 flowers that I used in the book. And those are based on the geometrical language and rules that are used to break down nature into geometry in the Islamic manuscript tradition. And so it's a wayfinding system. So if you look really closely, it'll resemble the flower that it's placed next to.
Yeah, the wayfinding system was really, really interesting and helpful because when I first was examining the book, you had mentioned in the video that it's the two structures combine the European format and the Islamic Codex. And just personally, I'm used to reading in both directions because I read English books and Japanese books. But I had a very cognizant moment when I realized that I had to read both of these. I couldn't just read across one direction or the other. I actually had to read to the center of the book. And those wayfinding helped, but it was really, it was a startling moment for me that really kind of it brought up a strong reaction about the dominant reading patterns and assumptions, which I think ties so closely into the messages and the history that you're highlighting and in this book. And I'm curious, it feels like this book just absolutely had to be this structure, but did you identify that early on, or can you speak to a little bit to how you came to it?
Yeah, I came to it. I knew from the beginning that it had to be, both the pieces had to be joined somehow. And so the first thing I thought of was a do-si-do, but that didn't work because they weren't really talking to each other. And so I kind of almost right off the bat came up with that structure, and then refined it further and further until it is what you see now.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think the do-si-do, absolutely, they would be in opposition. I think one of the strengths of this is just how they come together and are read alongside each other. It's really beautiful. This book was such a collaborative endeavor, and that was such a deliberate choice and intention on your part to honor the collaborative model of the past with this work, particularly from the Mughal period. Is this a way that you've worked a lot in the past, or do you think is it something you have a lot of experience with?
Not at all.
Oh.
It's a complete leap of faith. Don't have any experience working like that on a book project, especially of this scale. And so it really was just having an idea in mind and then leaving it up to the artist that I was collaborating with and hoping that what I see at the end is actually what I imagined, which sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't, but each surprise was something that actually added to the finished book.
Oh wow. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like all of the elements really they work together so unified that I was curious how much how much collaborative discussion you had as your collaborators were working in. Can you speak a little bit to maybe some of those points?
Sure. Yeah. So the miniature painter is based in Delhi, and I'd met him before. I really liked his style and his philosophy and his way of working, and the fact that he worked with his father and brother in the same studio. And he seemed really open and did a lot of work for contemporary artists. So I just asked if, for chance, he was interested in collaborating on something with me, and he said yes. And so we talked about the project, and I explained to him what my kind of main role was. And we shared some books back and forth, and most of it was on WhatsApp after that because I was in Norway and he was in Delhi, and every time I would go back, we would meet and trade, what he'd done and my progress on the book. And so it was sending of videos, images, voice notes, back and forth. And what ended up happening, which was kind of frustrating but also unique, was that I'd printed all the base images first to give him an idea of the shape of the flower and the colors, and then sent a reference image so that he could actually look at a picture of the flower that he was working on while he was working, so that he could pick his colors and his light and shade accordingly. But everything that I'd sent that came back to me was larger than I'd sent in. So I'd actually had to trim out the illustrations and make them overlap on the base sheets, which added many more hours of work. But in the end, it actually referenced this historical thing that used to happen in manuscripts, because the borders were finished before the inside illustrations, and they would sometimes go out of the borders, which is what happened with mine.
I love that. I love that carry through the intentional direction and point of making this collaborative project to reference and honor the history, but that the history came forward too. Like it's it's wonderful. Um, and there were other collaborators, like the poet who wrote the couplets. I was really stunned at the sensitivity between the text at the top of the page, which kind of describes these very sensual moments and impressions and memories of these flowers, and then the couplets. And I was really surprised to actually learn that they were written by two different people.
Yeah, so the poet is actually my uncle, who loves to read and write Urdu poetry. And I know that he's a fan of flowers, certain flowers. And so when I talked to him about this book, he said he wanted to be involved in some way. And I had thought about asking him, but I wasn't sure if he had the time. And the way that we approached that was we looked at each flower, sent each other pictures whenever we were out on walks of, when we encountered them out in the city. And then I talked to him about my impression of this plant or this tree or this flower, and which actually translated to that text. And so he really ruminated on that for almost half a year and said that he would write the poetry once he could see the illustrations. So they're actually a response to the illustrations and the
Oh.
conversations that we had.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting to kind of break down the steps and how everything kind of came together. Now, but there were other collaborators on this project as well, yes?
Yes, so there's someone who then took the poetry and did the calligraphy, and then turned the calligraphy into digital files so that I could print them digitally. And then there is someone who did all the special end sheets, gold leaf them, and hand cut them using scissors.
There's somebody who's currently working on the binding, who's in the States, Adam Bryant. And there's someone who did the gold foil, because that's not my area of expertise at all. So yeah, there's a lot of people. I don't know if I'm missing any.
Wow, what an
Paper
amazing.
makers, the paper makers, yes, they were huge collaborators. Of course, the book wouldn't be possible without them. So they made paper exactly the way I wanted it, the different weights, and they made it in the way it would have been made in the 14th century in India.
Amazing. I mean, it's just, I think it's a testament to your dedication and your vision that you were able to harness the skills of and bring together the skills of all these different people around the world and really make a incredibly beautiful and unified object that really like underscores the story that you're sharing about how this colonial and commercial interests really influenced and affected change on the aesthetics. I'm overwhelmed by the thought of organizing all of that.
Why it took 4 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, only 4 years. So do you think you'll work like that in the future?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun, and it was pretty scary at times, but I feel like it helped me. It helped me become a better artist, maybe a better person.
Well, that sounds like a bonus, a side bonus to come out of making such an amazing endeavor. You know, I was I when I was thinking about the flora of Mughal India and kind of how it addresses the colonial and commercial interests and how they really pushed aside the aesthetic of the Mughal manuscripts and the illuminations that glorified nature and beauty. Beauty was a really big word that that your book made me think about and really like consider what beauty is in different places and different time periods and how we use beauty, how we perceive it and how it can be commercialized. And I was just really curious, like what is beauty to you? You know, I know that's a really big, daunting question, but it made me wonder, especially considering, you know, that you live and work in many places around the world, and you have a lot of different influences and experience. I was curious how that, and if this book influenced your ideas of beauty.
It definitely did. Um, and I have been thinking about it too. I think for me, it has a lot to do with absolute purity of intention. I feel like beauty is so visceral. It's not rational. It's not a cerebral thing. When you engage with something that you immediately think is beautiful, it's not a rational thought. It's a visceral, more physical sensation. And I think for me, that has to do with something very pure and the intention. Like if you look at a really, for me, beautiful Mughal manuscript, what's clear that comes across to me is the purity of intention, which is devotion. They're not trying to make it a beautiful book. They're trying to make it devotional. And I think that has translated itself into beauty in that example.
That's really interesting. I definitely I feel you very deeply on this visceral response, this purity. I think that's a very astute and wise reading and understanding of beauty, because it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to define and a hard thing to understand how we perceive and use it. Well, Radha, I was going to check the chat and see if I missed any questions, but it doesn't look like I did. Did you have anything about the project that we haven't touched on that you wanted to make sure that, you know, we spoke to tonight?
No, I think we covered it all. Thank you, though.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your incredible work on this project that you've spent 4 years and ultimately a lifetime working towards. It's really a marvelous work, and I hope everybody has the opportunity to find a collection near you or an exhibition near you that allows you to at least look at, if not handle and read the book, because the experience is it's you're going to take so much away from it, not just beauty, but in terms of your own understanding of many layers of history, of aesthetics, of reading, of material, of all of it coming together. So thank you, Radha.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd love to invite Radha, you're welcome to pop back on, and I'd love to invite the other finalists as well for a Q&A. Elisa Banks, Ann Covell, Thad Higa, Radha, you can come back, and Veronica Shapers, could you please join me on screen? And then I will open with a few questions, and I invite everyone in the audience to also add questions to the chat. We'd love to get your questions answered as well. And I'll just wait for everybody, I think is now on. Great. And we can, I'm gonna change my view and see if I can see multi-speaker. Perfect. All right. One of the things I always find really exciting about the MCBA Prize when we launch it is seeing all the varied approaches to artist books, both thematically and formally, taking place across the globe at a particular point in time. And while each of your approaches to the book is unique, I'm curious about some of the connections in themes that are coming through across your works: translation, memory, politics, religion, colonization, justice and injustice, history and culture, and historical structures and approaches to bookmaking. And obviously not all of those are pertinent to each of you, but some of them are. Anne and Veronica, both of you are using source text that you've rendered, I want to say unreadable, but maybe readable in a different way from its original form. And Anne, first to you, what motivated your choice to use redactions from the Mueller report as a focal point, and how do these redactions reflect those complexities of justice and accountability as you're approaching that material?
Yeah, I would say that I had this project in mind for several years, and so it started out as being a contemporary text. When I started thinking of these themes of lack of justice and sort of grappling with sort of what to do with feelings sort of stuck and not able to really reconcile what was happening in our country, in the United States. And so I always had that text in mind in particular because it seemed like such a sort of obvious go-to to speak to that sort of lack of accountability on such a large scale. And it just kind of always seemed like the right text to use, even now, years later, to sort of just represent that just massive pile of information that we have really no idea, and we'll never really have an idea the depths of corruption and injustice that are happening in our country. And so it just always seemed like the right text to use, and so I decided to stick with it when I went with this project.
Thank you. Veronica, you collaborated with a cryptologist to encrypt an original Japanese short story text that you weren't able to use, so you wouldn't violate copyright. Can you talk about how this process transformed the narrative and how it informed your aesthetic choices for the book as you developed it?
Okay. Yeah, that was a very long process. As I told before, I wanted to print this story or translate this story almost now 12 years ago, which I never got the right to. So I tried to make finally something with this text that you cannot really violate the copyright. And it was quite a long process because today it's quite easy to find out what source you use, even if you start to crypticize this text in a very normal way. So I ended up with this really professional cryptologist, and the challenge was when you receive this kind of encrypted data, it's a binary code, and it's much longer than the original text. So it was really boring in the beginning if you just print binary codes. So the idea to use this password dictionary, which is used for cryptology currency, came up, and we have all these single words. And even I found it quite challenging to make a book of that you really want to continue to flip and you don't open, and then you think, okay, I understand this, and close it again. It was a quite long process, and some things were, because it is encrypted, they were just, I would say, natural to use, like this monospace font, and it's more like a natural way how it found its final form, and all these decisions, they were not made logically in advance, but they came up during the process of making and printing.
And Veronica, can you talk a bit about the collages that you based on objects and that were described in the original text, and how did you choose these objects, and what role do they play in carrying your personal interpretation of the narrative?
While you read a book or when you read a text, you have these very subjective impressions of things which appear in the text. So I tried to find, which took actually quite a lot of effort and time, things which looked as similar as the things I imagined while reading the text. I think that's also influenced very much about your personal experience it's ahead. So the story takes part in a place which I imagine as a place I have lived before in my, it's a Japanese story. When I just moved to Japan, I had a place where I lived, which I always thought of while reading the story. So I tried to find things which remembered me of that place. And to make it not too visible again, I just took photographs of all these things which I collected, and I scaled them all to the same size. So small things get really big and big things get small. So you cannot really see the relation between these objects anymore. And the next is I cut them completely apart. So sometimes it's only a very small portion which is still visible in the collage, and sometimes it's the whole object. But I wanted to make new forms which remind you of something, but which are not actually any hint at all to the original object, and of course not to the story neither.
Great, thank you. You refer to your work as a question mark rather than a neatly packaged idea. And what specific questions do you aim to provoke in your audience, and how do you foresee the resulting dialogue unfolding when interacting with this work?
So one question is, I would say, about perception, but a very important thing which drove me to work on this topic was like, it was a challenge for me. So not to give up, and not to, a little bit of stubborn thing. I'm quite a stubborn person, so I really didn't want to give up on this project. All of it was in my drawers for 10 years, and it was a challenge. I don't really want people, it was not my intention to ask many questions, but it was a very personal story, I would say. And I think everyone has this kind of experience in his life, that you are not allowed, or you see a wall which you cannot cross, but you somehow have to jump over it and make something new out of things which originally are not planned to be happen.
There's a question in the chat that I think is for each of you. So Veronica, maybe because you're spotlit, I'll start with you, and then I'll open it up.
Yeah.
I'll have books where not all is immediately accessible to the viewer. Can you speak to what you want the viewer to be able to understand, and maybe what is just for you or for certain audiences? So there's this element of, things being revealed and also concealed in each of your pieces.
A book is a very personal object, so it's different from a piece of art which you put on the wall and everyone can immediately see. So it's for me something very private, which reveals its content and story upon taking it in your hands, open it, and just flip through the pages. I think it's very important that you have some things somehow hidden between the pages, and it's also it depends on your personal experience and in your personal view if you reveal things or not, if you see things or not. And yeah, I think an artist book takes a lot of work and planning and ideas to make, so it should also be just reveal with a lot of time the contents. So it's not a propaganda poster, it's a very personal, intimate object with a lot of layers. I think that's why we all make books which have this sequence and depth.
Elisa, same question to you. Your book has this element of things that are revealed in a multisensory sense, and also things that are hidden. And I'm curious if you can speak to what you want the reader to be able to understand, and maybe what's just for you or for certain audiences.
I think the not being able to read it's more of a vibrational thing. I'm working against erasure and different ways in which history is communicated and passed on. And so a lot of it is hidden, but it has to be uncovered in some way. And we'll never know all of it, but I feel that it gives it a certain weight, even though it's not legible. Just knowing that it's there, the viewer, when they look through the slots where the aromatics are, you can see text in there. You may be able to make out a word or two, but and maybe even make out a sentence, but it's kind of circular. It's very difficult, really inaccessible to read the whole thing. But it's just that there is a history there. It's not just, there's a basis. It's to have to dig and to try to find what the basis is.
Great, thank you. Thad, would you like to answer that question as well? How you're thinking about what might be comprehensible to the viewer and what might be just for you or for certain audiences?
I want audiences to take away that slowness is important to understanding each other and teaching new ways to listen and hear each other and see one another, and how that can be expanded through like language, in particular, like looking at English language, which is the only language I speak, but within the English language, there's so many different types of ways of understanding the world. But we often see it as like a flattening of experiences when we all speak the same language, but it's most often not the case at all. Yeah, and for me personally, it's like the book was like a way to work out some of my own anger and frustration with the state of things. So a little bit of a therapy project, but trying to put those feelings to productive use, and see how it can maybe subvert or like upend like damaging historical or like alternative histories or things of erasure within like textbooks, for instance, and looking at the artist book as a way to do the exact opposite of what damaging education is in America.
Thank you. Anne, how about you?
Yeah, I would say that this book, it is a book. You can page through it, and each page is different. It all has different redactions on every page. But I sort of think of this book more as a book object or an art object, in that it conveys one singular thought. And thinking about what Radha was saying with the kind of visceral quality of beauty, I feel like this book, I think for me, has a real visceral quality, having to do with sort of grief and loss and sort of lack of justice. And so that's something that I wanted to convey, was in actually just holding the book and experiencing the book, whether that was paging through it or just sort of being with it, that it was a space to sort of contemplate a much larger idea, and to sort of grieve and deal with what's going on right now.
Thank you. Radha, how about you?
Yeah, I think what I really wanted to leave the reader with was that they have to work for the information. I mean, I know it's confusing to have a book that opens like this. So there are clues there, and I think more and more I feel like people read less and less or spend less and less time looking at a printed page or something with words on it. And I think this book and most of my work is a reaction to that, in that I just want people to be drawn closer to what I make, so that they actually feel engaged enough to spend time with it and then gain something at the end of that process, including the fact that because they spent time with something and understood how the mechanism of that object works, they actually gained a deeper understanding of it. So I think making things a little more difficult or challenging for the reader is something that I not strive for, but almost automatically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I think that might be true, kind of across the board with all of your books, that they invite this interaction with the reader. Veronica talked about the intimacy of the book form, and that for me is something that always resonates. Like, the book is this object that, like, you made it with your hands, and then, like, it's in my hands, and, like, what can be more intimate than that, right? Is, like, this object that kind of transcends space and time to create this intimacy between maker and viewer, and encourage that kind of deeper looking that, as we're kind of scrolling all the time, like, we're not kind of going deeper in that way. There's a question in the chat for Elisa. How did you know when you had the sense that you wanted, and what was that scent development process like?
It started by reading a lot of historical texts, as well as travelogues from when Africa was early colonization of West Africa, and some of the travels, and really had to kind of read between the lines. I looked for anything that would have a scent. And then I thought about the same sort of situation for each of the chapters. And after that, I researched some of the all of the aromatics. So I had lists of I also read cookbooks, which are more contemporary, but they may be they had some historical aspects to them. And so I looked for any account of anything that could have a smell. And then I kind of extrapolated from that. You can't have, like, 100, well, I guess you could have 100 aromatics in one bottle, but it'll be kind of muddy. So once I selected the aromatics, which I also researched, because some of them say violet leaf is in several of them. Well, that's pretty straightforward. It's from a leaf of a violet plant. but something else like norlimdenol, which is kind of like an airy, it's called kind of an airy aspect, is kind of a sharp smell. It's more of a sensation than a smell. And so I had to look up, I knew what I wanted and had to kind of research what they were and get samples and try to figure out, yeah, that's kind of like what I want. That's what I want. And then put them all together so that they were balanced in some way. I am not a professional perfumer or scent worker or anything like that, but there's just there's a balance that matched the chapter headings. And when I got that, then I was satisfied. But it took a lot of trial and error to be able to do that. And I also took a few courses at I don't know, at the Institute of Art and Olfaction, and just online classes, and they were very very helpful as far as encouraging. So I knew the basics of how to mix, and how actually making the scent is one thing, but then when you have to make a lot of the same thing, that's another situation. And those classes really helped with that.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat for Thad. Yuka spoke about the feeling of urgency in much of the work, and that the red text in your book feels urgent. What was the sense of urgency that you were considering in your making process?
I'm trying to slow down. I'm feeling like less and less urgent, or like this type of I don't know. I think there's like a feeling of like heroic complex of like, oh, I gotta get out and say something immediately that'll change things right now. And but then in a lot of my work, I'm just trying to slow down. And I mean, as far as like using red, I just maybe like visually I like to be urgent because I just love red. I love the strength and boldness of red. Yeah. Everything feels, there's a lot of urgent things. I don't know.
Great. Radha spoke a bit about some of the surprises that come up in the process, and you know, I think most of the folks in this room probably know, like, artist books take a really long time to make, and it's a process. And things come up. So I'm curious for each of you, and maybe Thad and Elisa, we can start with you because you're spotlit already, and then we'll open it up. What surprises or unanticipated directions happened in the course of developing your books? Either kind of positive things, or like, oh, that didn't work and I had to go in this other direction that I wasn't anticipating and it took me into a different place.
Me?
Sure.
Surprises and new directions. I was surprised that I could make it into an edition more than 3 books.
What is your edition size for this?
It's 50.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've never done it. I've never done that many. And it seemed like an impossible task. I was like looking for publishers or something for a long time. But once I got the setup going, and I guess maybe that feeling of urgency was like, all right, I can just bust it out and do all of this.
Great. Elisa, how about you?
I guess for me, the fact that I was able to pull those scents off, I wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to do it. I mean, in theory, it seemed okay, and then I was worried about how to get it into the bottle to where it wouldn't spill out. And so it was really, in retrospect, it was fairly simple to use cotton, but I wanted to also use all materials as much as I could that had some type of cultural significance. So I guess a few of the pieces of the book turned out differently than I expected, because I thought I would have to do something really complicated, and some of the processes were a little more simple. I took the simple approach, which is sometimes the best approach, and filling the bottles, which seems like, well, that shouldn't be a big deal, but I was really worried about processing them and packaging them in a way that they would remain stable and unchanged and not cause any damage.
Thank you. Anne, how about you?
Yeah, well, I don't know why, just it's my personality or something, but I tend to do really labor intensive projects. And this one kind of took the cake on that. And I think one thing that was kind of scary about the whole process of making this book was that I didn't really know if it was going to work until I got the whole first one done. And so that was a lot of labor to get to that point, because it is all, handmade paper that's all hand cut. And then I had to, of course, learn how to make medieval girdle books on top of that. And so it was a kind of scary process making the first one. But and also making the entire thing black too. I kind of hemmed and hawed about whether it should be black or not. If it would be too illegible or too difficult to really understand, because you have to get so close to it to really page through and see all of those redactions and see kind of the light shine through those holes. So I sort of just kind of jumped in and decided to do it, but it was pretty scary for a while until I got that first one done and really was happy with what I was able to do with the piece, and decided to make 10 for some reason, which I wish I would have probably done 5, but I'm happy.
I've never wished an edition was bigger when I was making
it. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Veronica, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't say there were many detours once I started to work, but of course, all these preparations beforehand, I did many small dummies and tested around. But at that point, when I started to print, I did it step by step. And since I really do everything when I make a book, from concept and design, printing to binding, it's always for me a process. I don't plan a book from start to the beginning and then I produce it, but I just start. And I start printing, and I had some restriction because of paper, which was not available. But I just make one portion after the other, and I have some image how the book should look like when I start. It always ends up very differently, but that's not. I know this, so it always happens. It's always the same story when I make a book, and was not really a surprise. It's always a long way, and I think the good thing is if you make everything by yourself, you can. It's a process.
Thank you. And Radha, you spoke to this a little bit already, but is there anything that you would want to add to that around, surprises or unanticipated directions or things that came up in the process? Quite different from Veronica's process, obviously working in collaboration with many people. So sort of the opposite of working on something alone.
Yeah, just how open one has to be to all kinds of possibilities when you're doing that. I think I wasn't quite ready for it. And what Veronica just said, I mean, it always turns out different than you imagine it in your head, but I think for me, it was much more different than I imagined it in my head, and that I like it at the end. I'm kind of surprised that I actually like it at the end. So, yeah.
Thanks. There's a question in the chat. This is for anyone who'd like to answer. So feel free to just, if this question is compelling to you, unmute and answer it, and we can kind of go through if more than one of you wants to answer. This person said, "Thank you all for being here. A question for anyone who would like to answer. Who are some of your artistic influences, and how has your relationship to them changed, either throughout this project or throughout your career?" Anybody want to take that one up?
I love Barbara Kruger. She's my favorite.
Also uses a lot of red text.
Red
What do you like
text.
about her, and how has your relationship with her changed, either through this project or through your career?
I don't know if I have a career. I've loved her the same since I was first introduced. Um, I love her humor. I just love straight up text. I like her perspective and coming from advertising and looking at the ways that like language controls us and how language lives in the public space. So I oftentimes will think about my practice in terms of like how that language can in the public space and advertising can be translated into the private and the reading of a book.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to answer about artistic influences and how your relationship with those might have changed? And if not, I have if we don't have any more questions in the chat, I have a kind of final question for each of you about actually I have two final questions. So one question for each of you. I'm curious if or for anyone who wants to kind of catch this one, if you could speak to how historical book structures have influenced your approach to artist books, either as a direct influence or as something to push against. So a few of you are using, structures or approaches that are really based in the history of the book, or kind of pushing against that in some ways. So I'm curious if anybody wants to speak to that.
Well, I can, I guess, because mine has the most direct link to that question.
Yep.
In a lot of ways. Yeah, I think I'm just really interested in structure, and I'm really interested in having kind of just a wide range of abilities to use structures that fit whatever project I'm working on. And I don't know per se with this book why the medieval structure made sense, but for some reason it always did, because this is such a contemporary topic, but it's also something that's always been a problem. It's always been a topic, and in a way it sort of felt like we're sort of in a dark ages again, and in a lot of ways, and so referencing a medieval structure just really made sense. And it was really the first opportunity that I had an idea that I was able to draw on this historical structure for this contemporary topic. And so that's sort of why I chose it. But I've always wanted to use historical structures because I think it's a really interesting thing to bring that history forward and to make it, contemporary again, and make sense in sort of the context of whatever we're going through in this period in history. And so that's sort of why I chose that structure, that historical structure. But I always find it really interesting when other artists do that as well. And
really gives a sort of a layer and depth to the work that I think is really interesting.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that question around historical structures? Otherwise, we've got one more in the chat. Betty's asking if there's time for another question. How do you view your work within the larger book arts community? Do you feel part of it? If so, how has it played a role in your work for support, inspiration, or do you feel your work in isolation from the community? A complex question. I can see you all pondering.
I can jump in there. I certainly don't use historical historical structures, and I feel that I'm on the edge usually, thinking about the ways in which different senses or other ways of communicating history or culture or anything really is what books do, tell a story. How were those done for people who did not have access to the written word? Maybe it was a secret, usually not at all. And how I'm doing the same thing that a traditional book does, but using other ways in order to send the message. In this last book in particular, scent was used to communicate, as well as knowing what your bearings are. And the way that we usually use scent is also was used as a form of a way of communicating. So I feel like I'm on the edge of what a book is with many of my pieces. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
I mean, I still feel part of a book community, just definitely not technical as far as the, I'm not a technical book artist. I don't do any really, rarely do traditional bookbinding techniques, but I still feel that I'm part of a bookbinding, of the book arts community, I guess I should say, from afar.
Would anyone else like to answer that about the kind of tension between, do you feel part of a larger book arts community, or, feeling more kind of working in isolation? And if no one else wants to jump on that, I'll have a final question for each of you. What are you excited about or working on next? And Elisa, you are, or currently, next or currently, we could say. Elisa, I'll start with you because you are spotlit. So I'm gonna put you on the spot because you already are.
I'm actually working on a show that will have some books, and I'm working on an altered book right now, a history book. Hopefully I'll get it done in time. But so I'm still working on the theme of erasure and trying to reclaim history, basically. Bring it out to the forefront.
Thank you. Veronica, how about you?
I'm working on 2 projects right now. Both of them are very in the beginning, and it's not really the final form. It's, as I told before, it starts with the concept, and I'm done with the concept, I would say. And both of these projects have to do with a little bit with history, but very recent history, and also one is dealing with truth and invention, what is true and what is invented. But I cannot really say much about it at this point. So yeah, but yeah, I'm just digging and researching a lot at the moment.
Thank you. Radha, how about you?
I'm working towards a solo show in January in Norway. I'm working, I guess it's some people do this here where they have to make a new work for the show. So I'm making a huge version of this movable book that I have called Jali. It's in paper, but the work that I'm making for the show is in wood, and it'll be 2 meters by 2 meters when it's expanded. And so it'll take, the public is welcome to come and move the book. It'll be on the floor to open and close it as a way of engaging them more physically with the book.
Fantastic. Anne, how about you?
I'm currently working on a book that has to do with two things, with politics and the environment, which are two themes that have kind of run through my work but have been separate. But this one book will sort of address both things. And so the main kind of theme of it is wildfire, and how wildfire is a healthy thing for the environment, but it is something that has gotten very much out of control, and is sort of untamed at this point. And so it'll be a book that does that story, that twofold story, but it also will layer over the top of that kind of a look at sort of the politics and the rise of fascism, and how these things run, or seem to run, in these 100-year cycles where they die down and then they build back up, and then kind of address that sort of same, it's kind of hard to describe, it's very early stages, but getting out of control as well. So how sort of both these like sort of ideas of environment and politics can be healthy and can be very unhealthy as well.
And Pat, how about you?
I'm just starting to work on very early on, so hopefully I'm not jinxing it. A Palestine protest poster show. Especially all these posters that have come out since the genocide in Palestine began. So anti-apartheid, anti-genocide posters and print material. And I'm also working on a show for the elections. That's my version of Big Mural of the American flag.
Thank you. Well, we will be excited to keep an eye out for all of your upcoming projects. Yuka saying good luck to everyone with these upcoming projects. Yes, I look forward to seeing what each of you do. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank especially the finalists and the MCBA Prize winner for sharing their work with us, sharing their influences, sharing their inspirations. And thank you all, and good night. Thank you. Take care.